The Honourable Member for the Yukon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise today to speak again to Bill C-19, the Act to end the long gun registry. In my last speech when I spoke about this bill, I talked about what role long guns play in Canadians' lives for both rural and urban settings, for women and for men. They are tools for hunting, tools for trapping, tools for farming, and tools for athletics. I talked about how they constitute a symbol of our past and indeed remain a necessary tool of present-day life for so many Canadians. First Nation, Aboriginal, and all law-abiding gun owners have been stigmatized and subjected to this onerous and misguided legislation for far too long. Since the second reading of C-19, the opposition has not lacked in emotion, but has consistently fallen short on the facts. Mr. Speaker, here are the facts. The Long Gun Registry does nothing to make Canadians safer. The Long Gun Registry, we were told, would cost about $2 million, and it has ballooned to exceed $2 billion. The Long Gun Registry targets law-abiding citizens because criminals are not registering guns, nor are they using these sorts of guns to commit crimes. Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce you to what I call the 7 myths of the opposition. And if any of my honourable colleagues would like to count along with me, they're more than welcome. Myth number 1. The Long Gun Registry will help keep suicide rates down. But during committee, of which I was a member, we heard clear evidence from peer-reviewed studies which concluded, and I quote, "The discontinuation of the registration of non-restricted firearms is not likely to result in an increase in the aggregate suicide rate." Myth number 2. The Long Gun Registry will keep women safer. During committee, we clearly heard peer-reviewed research which demonstrated discontinuation of non-restricted firearms will not result in an increase in homicide or spousal homicide rates through the utilization of long guns. And this only makes sense, Mr. Speaker, because the people registering long guns are not committing these crimes. These are men and women who are impeded by the red tape and the stigma of being long gun owners. But they do their civic duty despite the unnecessary and wasteful burden imposed and register their firearms because their government tells them it's the law. Meanwhile, criminals don't do any of this and enjoy the freedom to operate outside of the law with all the rights and protections of the law. This does not make sense to people in my riding, and it does not make sense to me. The opposition attempts to position the debate on long guns as men against women, an offender and victim. But on committee we heard directly from women. Women who hunt, women who trap, women who have represented our great nation in international shooting competitions. The opposition would like Canadians to believe that it's only men who own guns, and this is simply not the case. Myth number 3. Guns will now be as easy to get as checking out a book at a library. The opposition here is ignoring the facts and misleading people who don't own long guns and who aren't familiar with the process. I can tell Canadians, as can any long gun owner, that the requirements for licensing is not changing, and this includes a Canadian firearm safety course, and for some, additional hunter safety and ethics development courses, and of course, pre-screening security background checks. Myth number 4. Police support the registry, and the elimination of the registry will put police in danger. Here is what we heard from law enforcement officers, and I quote, "I can tell you that the registration of long guns did not make my job as a conservation officer any safer." That was brought to us by Donald Welts on committee. We also heard in committee that a survey conducted April of 2011 of 2,631 Edmonton City Police concluded that 81% supported scrapping the long gun registry. We heard that the Auditor General found that the RCMP could not rely on the registry because on account of the large number of errors and omissions. We heard numerous times that the police state they do not trust the information contained in the registry and they would not rely on that information to ensure their safety. Myth number 5. The data should be saved and turned over to the provinces who wish to create their own registry. The registry is the data, and our commitment to the Canadian people was clear. Anything less would be disingenuous. The data collected under federal law for a federal purpose, and it will not be turned over to another jurisdiction. The committee heard evidence that the RCMP has reported error rates between 43 and 90% in firearms applications and registry information.
Amazing.
We also heard that a manual search conducted discovered that 4,438 stolen firearms had been successfully re-registered. With these errors, it would be irresponsible to the extreme to allow this unreliable, ineffective, and grossly expensive system to be handed over to anyone. Myth number 6. Registering a long gun is no different than registering your car. And what did we hear in committee on this assumption? Solomon Friedman accurately stated that unlike registering your car, failure to comply or errors in the application have criminal implications. Mr. Speaker, you won't be going to jail or receive a criminal record if you don't register your car. Myth number
7.
Registering your firearm is simple, so what's the harm? Again, Mr. Speaker, the harm is that any mistake has criminal implications, and the mistakes in the registry are staggering. Furthermore, consider some more testimony from Mr. Friedman, and I quote, "I have 2 law degrees. I clerked at the Supreme Court. I practice criminal law for a living, and even I, at times, find the provisions of the Firearm Act and the gun control portions of the Criminal Code convoluted, complex, and confusing." If this is the case, Mr. Speaker, how can we expect average Canadians to navigate this quagmire without error, and how can we have criminal consequences as a result? How can we expect our law enforcement officers to interpret and apply complex and convoluted legislation with discretion and consistency if a criminal lawyer well-versed and studied on the subject matter finds it difficult at times? Mr. Speaker, I would like to highlight the conclusions of Gary Mauser, Ph.D., Professor Emeritus at the Institute for Canadian Urban Research Studies from Simon Fraser University, when he accurately pointed out that responsible gun owners are less likely to commit murder than other Canadians. The Long Gun Registry has not demonstrated its value to the police. The Long Gun Registry has not been effective in reducing homicide, and the data in the Long Gun Registry are of poor quality and should be destroyed. And Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what will happen. Our government has made a clear commitment. Promise made, promise kept. We know we're on the right track, and how do we know this? Because 2 years ago, my honourable colleague, member from Portage-Lisgar, introduced a private member's bill, Bill C-19, and that bill's passage would have ended the Long Gun Registry, but was defeated in this House by a mere 2 votes. But, Mr. Speaker, those weren't free votes, and members turned their backs on their constituents for fear of reprisal from their party. Some stated publicly that they were in favor of scrapping the registry, but weren't willing to leave their party over it or be removed from it. The only reason the Long Gun Registry has survived this long is because members picked their party over their constituents, and Canadians remembered that this past May.
Hear, hear.
How else do we know we're on the right course? Well, evidence in the committee, as I've already mentioned, was overwhelming in favor of getting rid of the Long Gun Registry, and that was empirical evidence, not opinion evidence. And members from the opposition from Thunder Bay Rainy River and Thunder Bay Superior North voted in favor of C-19, but were punished for it, punished for doing what their constituents wanted, and I congratulate them for that decision. The member from Western Arctic abstained from the second reading of the vote. And Mr. Speaker, one can only hope that the member will remember his commitments to the great people of the Northwest Territories, that he chooses them and chooses facts over the hysteria and hyperbole running rampant through the opposition benches. Regardless, Mr. Speaker, I can tell the citizens of Yukon, NWT, and Nunavut that this member and the honourable member from Nunavut will be standing up for their rights and their use of long guns as daily tools to practice traditional, cultural, and present-day necessities of life by standing up and voting to end the wasteful and ineffective Long Gun Registry once and for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.